you know, changing the views is something you'll do a lot if you're modeling in 3D. So it's very important. The next step is, so I'll blank this holes layer, and staying in the CAD layer, I'm going to do an Extrude Boss. Okay. And the Extrude Boss will bring up the shape of this flange. I'm going to chain select this part. I can also window pick the part. The difference is window pick, I hold the leftmost button and drag the box to encompass everything in the window. It will select. Otherwise, I can chain select. You may hear that a lot. You may have heard that in past webinars, past trainings. If you've seen any of our videos, chain selecting, hold the shift key and left click. This does a couple things. This will ensure that you have a closed chain. It does consider the chain selection tolerance that we have in preferences. We can talk about that a little bit later. But it does give you, it will select that chain on that plane. In this case, I have this part selected, and it gives me a list of the geometry here. And it'll highlight, if I pick this geometry, it'll highlight which entity this is. Down below, the choices are, you know, pretty straightforward. You have the distance in the positive and distance in the other direction. So in this case, I'm going to select, you know, say a 1/4 inch here. Draft angle, if you wish to have a draft angle, say 5 degrees, you can select that in there. I'll keep that, you know, to 0 and nothing in the other direction. And then this will give me the ability to create this part. The options along normal and along z-axis. Along normal means if this part were out on an angle, let's say a 45 degree, I had the wireframe on a 45 degree along an axis, it's going to extrude normal to the plane of that geometry. Along z would force it to be the along z of the world coordinate system. This case, this part happens to be both. So they're both the same. So I'll just click OK here to create my part. I can cancel out of that. So we have, you know, the start of our drawing here. The next thing I'll do is I'll use that holes layer, right? And I'm going to extrude cut the holes. And the reason why I didn't do this in one step, because I want to show a little bit later, as we start building this, you see the CAD tree tab. So this CAD tree holds a history of what we're building here. So if I did it in one step, I want to be able to isolate the holes from the outside shape. I could do it in one step and normally would, but I'm thinking that I may want to make revisions to those holes down the line. So thinking, you know, ahead, I'll say, okay, well, I'm going to create that as two separate features, just so I can easily manipulate that geometry. And we'll see an example of that a little bit later. So the next step here will be to cut the holes. So Extrude Cut, right? It's located here on the menu bar. I'll just pick the Extrude Cut here. Select the geometry, same deal. I'll turn on the holes layer, and what I can do is I can press S to shade that. S turns the shading, the solid, on and off, so you're able to then see what's going on. These control points here, these arrows, allow you to drag, right, the extrusion or the cut to a desired height. I can then input that. I can use a combination of both. I can drag them, then I can also input a value. I generally like to make it a little bit bigger, just in case I actually want to revise the thickness of that flange. So I'm kind of thinking ahead a little bit, but I may not make any revisions to it. But you know, just for the way I like to build it, I bring it a little bit further than it needs to be. So we can click OK here, and if I turn my solid shading back on, we see that we have our part. Okay, so we're getting there. Okay. Now the next step I want to talk about is our UCSs. We have the world coordinate system here in the bottom left corner of our screen. This coordinate system shows and is always where the views are based off of. So if I'm going to go up here, we have a shortcut here for the views on the toolbar. Again, you may customize your own toolbar, so it may look different. I generally work from a stock toolbar, so everything will be in place for majority of users, but you can of course customize these toolbars. In my case, I have a stock layout here, so this toolbar here, I'm going to pick a front view, and I get a front view. And this is also corresponding to our UCSs. So down here in our organizational area, we have layers, UCS, and of course our posting tab. This is where we're going to work to create our different UCS planes that we're going to add geometry to, or add rather. So if I select the front UCS, you'll see that this little shaded plane gets shown. And if you notice, if you see the Z-axis is pointing almost, along the lines of what was the Y in the world coordinate system, and then the Y is actually the Z, and X is in the same direction. So it's rotated 90 degrees. You'll always get these planes when you're working or creating a UCS that isn't in the standard top plane. Top plane's the only one that doesn't have that, and it kind of lets you know that you're working in that plane. So the side plane, same kind of deal. I actually do want to draw on this side, but what I want to show is the direction makes a difference, right? So the Z direction is pointing towards the length of my part, the X is pointing along the short side of my part, and Y going up and down. So if I were to create geometry on this UCS, right, let me create a circle. Okay, or arc. I'll go to arcs and coordinates. So the idea is, let me make a small one here, 0.375. Okay, and if I put the coordinates at x1, y1, the expected location is exactly there, right? So the x is positive is in this direction, y positive is in this direction. So it's at 1 and 1. But I'm actually looking to work off of this corner here. So a positive 1 and 1 would be, again, it's relative to this UCS. So let's create a UCS where I want to create one. To do that, we go down the layer UCS manager, we right click, add new UCS. Okay, there are a few different options for adding a UCS. Snap, you can snap it to a piece of geometry, or a snap point rather. Planar face, you can go to the face of a part. So if I create and pick this piece of geometry, I've now snapped this to this planar face. Cylindrical face, this will allow me to pick off a cylindrical face, and then we have direction 1 and 2, which basically means which way the Z is going to be pointing. So if I want to create a plane there off the middle of this cylinder, pointing up, direction 2 will go down. And then we have another one called 3 points, right? 3 points and move are the existing ones. So let's say, for instance, let's look at the move option here for a second. So if I want to take one of these UCSs, and I can right click on them, and I can say modify this UCS once it's created. I'll pick the move option, and let's say I would like to come up in Z 0.25. Now click OK. What it does is it's moved the location of that UCS. It hasn't created a second UCS. This was the one that I created initially and then modified. So I got that one UCS that I moved, and then I got the one at the back here that we created. These UCSs can be named. They can also, if you don't wish to use them, you can also delete the UCS here. So if you click OK a couple times, it may create additional UCS inadvertently. You can simply just delete the UCS. The other option that I'm going to use here, by adding a UCS, I'll use the 3 points, kind of like one that I usually use because you get a lot of control over it, although there's a couple extra clicks. So down at the bottom here, we have this yellow bar, and you'll see this in a lot of our functions. It's at the bottom. Sometimes it may seem out of view if you're focused on your work, but it gives you tips there at the bottom of exactly what to do. So for most of our features and functions. So if you forget, have a peek down there at the bottom of the screen. It's going to give you an idea of what your next step is. So I'm going to click a snap point to set the UCS origin, right? Then it's asking me click or a point or snap point for the X positive direction. I'll pick over in this direction, and then it asks me for the Y. So I'll pick the end of this line. It assumes the Z then, that's enough information. And then I have my UCS at the location I want. And I can go continue my drawing. So that's kind of like a quick little overview. We get a lot of questions about that, so I wanted to kind of show that for some of you that have been working with the software for a while. You know, you may be familiar with that, but I always like to touch on that because there is some confusion with that, especially when you get to things like, there's my UCS, and I'm going to click a top view, right? So I don't have that view. I don't have that view because the views are tied to the world coordinate system. You can view active to the normal use or normal to the UCS by going to views and then normal and active UCS. Then you can select that, although it's still tied to the world coordinate system. In this case, I have it on this plane to view, but again, the views are tied to the world UCS. We have had some requests to kind of change that around, but there are some. It's something that we may look into in the future. Well, let's continue here. So I have my my part here, as everybody can see, and then I'm going to add some geometry for the back part of that hinge, and we'll kind of run through the rest of this here. So the next step is what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to use my layers tool again, and in this layers tool, add a new layer, and we'll call it arc. Okay, and we'll make that the active layer. At which point I'm going to use the arcs and coordinates command, and then I'll set, I think it's something like, if I can recall, something like that. We'll set an arc there. Okay, so we got an arc, and as you can see, I'm going to extrude this. There's a number of different ways to draw a part like this, and as I go through, once I complete drawing this, I'm going to show you guys a couple tips on. I'm sure some of you are thinking, oh well, he could have just done it one way or another way. There's many different ways to do this. I want to showcase a couple of these couple features, and then we'll look at a couple of different ways to get this going. But for the meantime, we'll use this as an extrude and join these together. I'll go back to the CAD layer, even though I'm using that arc geometry. So these two are joined together when I use the Extrude Boss. So that'll be the same tool I use again, Extrude Boss. I'll select my geometry. I want nothing in this distance. I want 4 inches in this distance, right? So along normal. And we're starting to get something that looks like the finished product. Now let's have a look at the cancel out of that function. I'll go to the, when it switches to the top UCS, so we get that out of the way, see what's going on there. For now, what I'll do is I may want to change this geometry just a little bit. So I'll actually use our solids and fillet option, and I'll put it in 1/4 inch is fine. And just pick some geometry here, pick this edge, pick the bottom edge, just add some detail to it, you know, just to give you an idea. And let's do some cutouts for the additional part on this hinge here. We have these cutouts, and then we have also obviously the bolt hole or the dowel that goes through to hold it in place. So let's looking back here. We'll go through the next step here. Okay, let's cancel that out. So let's make another layer again, just to organize geometry and be able to isolate it. I'll call this cutout. We'll make that the active layer. Let's give it a top view here to see kind of what we're trying to get after. So we'll go to other and rectangle, and let's say the length will be 3/4. Okay, let's do something like that. And then the origin, let's do x1, y 2.25, something like that. Okay, so we'll click OK. And then we'll actually gonna add 2 more of these, one at 2-inch spacing and one at 3-inch spacing. All right, so we got a little array here of rectangles, and if we look, you can see where they're located, kind of middle of the part, still on just below you know, the midpoint of that. So next step is let's cut them out. So we'll use that extrude cut option again. So select the extrude cut option, or rather, give me a second. Step back one. I'm going to make the CAD CAD layer active because I want to select from it to work on that layer. So extrude cut, and then I'm chain selecting these parts, and it's holding some values from our previous operations. So we'll make that 1, and we'll make this one 1. Again, those that aren't familiar with it, you can use like math functions in any of our input boxes. I would say majority of our input boxes. So you're able to go in, and if there's I sometimes use this more so for toolpath. If you want to add a little bit of a small allowance, or you have a not exactly rounded number, and you want to add like a allowance to it or something like that, I'll use that a lot. And this is like a plus 40 thou, 20 thou, and it's convenient to use that. For those that are not unfamiliar with that, I use it like that in the CAM a lot. But you can use that in any of our input boxes. Moving on, so I'll select this cut. Okay, so I have a cut here, and what I can see here is cuts through this back part of the thing, and we're almost there. Okay, so what I want to point out at this point, I mentioned the holes, how I put those in a separate layer so I could modify them. I'll actually go and modify the geometry that I have here, because what we have is something that if I'm not satisfied with what I have, and I keep building up this part, I'll say that this extruded cut is not quite where it needs to be. It needs to come down more. So in the past, what you have to do is undo the steps, and redraw everything or delete. Now you can just update this geometry. You still have to create the geometry. It needs to know the shape you want. But what I can do is, in this case, I will turn off the geometry I don't need at this time, and then I'll modify this geometry. So I'll use lines and parallel. Number of ways you can do this. I'll use lines parallel just for an example, and let's say let's go 1/4 inch. Okay, so I'm basically clicking the line, and if you scroll your mouse to the top or bottom of this line, or left to right, just basically either side, to create a parallel line, and then left click again, it gives you that line at the distance you suggest. Next step is to trim. So I'll use the trim to entities, utilities, trim to entities, and I'll pick the line and pick the edge, and I'll do this here for these parts. Again, you could do one and translate it, copy it. There's many different ways to do this. I'm gonna do this the slow way. And then I can select and delete these other entities, right? You can highlight them. There's a little delete thing up here, or you can just press delete on your keyboard, which I did. And then when I reselect this geometry here under that extrude cut and click OK, I turn this layer back on, it's updated my model, right? So just a way to kind of enhance what you're doing, and it'll get you get you the shape that you need, and if you want to make revisions later, it makes that easier to do. All right, so the next step here is I'm going to put an arc here in the center, and then what I'll do is I'll cut through here. So we'll go back to our side UCS, and I'll just put an arc right here in the middle. So arc's coordinates, I'll pick, let me just do it, I think 1/4 inch will fit, something like that. Okay, 1/4 inch, and then we'll extrude cut this. I can press S again for the shading, bring that through the part, right? Click OK. And there we got, you know, an idea of kind of what we're after. Make it the top UCS, so get that out of the way. Can hide some of this stuff by turning off some of these layers. So that gives us an idea of kind of how to draw something like this up. If we want to, at that point, if I wanted to do a little chamfer here on the inside. You know, maybe pick something like this, you know, do something like this on here. And just kind of picking arbitrary dimensions, but gives you an idea of, you know, the workflow. Are there any questions on that? I know we got Mike answering questions here. If anybody's got any questions on kind of what we went through there, I'll give a few seconds here, or a minute or so. If anybody's got anything, you know, shoot in the questions. There should be a panel on your screen there where you can type in a question.
How would you extrude cut around?
So I mentioned earlier in the webinar that, you know, some of you are probably done a lot of drawing, and you're probably thinking, well, there's definitely more than one way to do this. Well, there is, and really, this shape isn't as difficult sometimes, or as it looks, and even it's just a profile that's extruded. So I created this with, I extruded the rectangle here, then I extruded this cylindrical surface, right? This cylinder here, and then I put some fillets on it. But really, what we really need is just this profile here, just this shape in 2D, and then we can make an extrusion. So kind of looking at maybe a new window just for a moment. We actually have something like that in the shape library. So I could even start from something like this shape here, kind of looks familiar or close enough. I'll pick that, and then from here I'm able to put in some dimensions. So I know that this was 2 inches. This number 2 was 0.25. We had this one was 0.375 times 2, I believe. This was 0.5, and that was 0.25. So pretty close to what I had drawn there. Aside from what's going on here, what I can do is trim this out. I may just leave it for now. But if you wanted, you could, you know, trim this or create geometry from that. But just to give an example, right, I'm drawing the Z. Z is going this way, Y is going this way, X positive. So I'd want to rotate this part if I want to put it the same orientation it were in the WCS. But as some of you may know, or some may not, it doesn't matter which position your shape is or your part is in the screen. When you're doing CAM, you're bringing that G54, the program 0, you're bringing that to the machine setup is brought to the part. So it can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to move it. You know, in past versions, you know, you'd have to bring it to the world coordinate system and line it up perfectly. You don't have to do that. It saves time. You can draw in any way, import any way, and you can kind of move to your CAM from there. In this case, I'll do Extrude Boss just as an example. And there you can kind of see, you know, what I'm getting at with that shape. Maybe go 0 here and 4 here. Oops, rather 4 here. So we're kind of getting to where we were before. I'll show the rotate command. Sometimes we're asked about that. So that's under utilities and rotate. Now when we select the part, right click and OK. So the idea with the rotate command, you got these control handles here, okay, and this controls which axis it's turning around. So if I turn this wheel, I've clicked this, think of it as like a wheel on an axle, a steering wheel. You're just turning that, and that's rotating the part along or around that axis. So as I turn this, we see in the top left corner of the screen, the data entry manager, you see the values grow or change. Okay, so I can click that. I can then override that if I want, say 70, right? And it gives me a preview. So when I click OK, this part will swing to this location here, and then we'll get an additional preview, the same increment. So you'll see that in a second. I'll click OK, and you see that would be the next increment. If I were to click OK again, around it would go in that interval. So what I'll do next is I'll zero this out, and I'll say, let's go around. I would like to go around this axis to lay it flat like this. Okay. So what I'm doing there is now in the Y, I'm turning it to 270. Hit Tab as I'm hitting Tab as I go through these, so it initializes and updates the preview. If you just click OK, that's fine too, but it'll jump right to that position, and I'll click OK, and I'll cancel out of this. So I have the shape on that plane. Again, not necessary, because we can bring in UCS to the part. So if I wanted to, in this case, I am sitting in a position that kind of aligns with my views, and that's kind of why sometimes I rotate the parts to it. If I don't have a lot of work to do on it, if I'm not doing a lot of 3D modeling or CAD, I'll probably just leave it where it is and start my CAM. If I have to maybe do some, like I said, additional CAD modeling, I'll bring it to this view. Couple clicks, I got it now along the lines of my views, and then I can create go on creating my part from there. So I won't run through the same thing twice, but you guys get the idea, I'm sure. I started drawing with my holes, put my holes in here, and I did extrude cut from there, my slots, and I'm kind of working the same as I did to achieve the same part, right? These two will kind of be on the same lines, except for the radius. I didn't edit that out. But two ways to do it. Just want to try and kind of stir up some questions, or again, fundamentals, but maybe somebody has some questions on that or hasn't seen part of that. Again, given the way this geometry is, I can make a new UCS. I can snap it 3 points. Let's say I want to draw I know the location from here. I'll snap 3 points. I'll get my UCS, and if I wanted to create an arc coordinate from there, let's do a 1/4 inch hole, and I'll make that from that location. Let's say no, it's a specific distance, so 2 inches in X and 1 in Y. I have a hole or 1/2 inch in Y. So that's kind of how you can go about creating the same part. 2 different ways. And again, there's probably 5 other ways to do that. I'm sure. But anybody have any questions on that? I know we have Mike answering questions here, so I'm trying to also grab from those topics to see what I can show you. If there are additional questions, we're gonna look at drilling here in a minute. So I wanted to talk a little bit here about drilling. So just give it a second for a couple more questions to come in, and we'll continue. So there was a question about how I modified this extrude cut. Well, in the in the CAD tree, again, remember how it holds our history here. of what we've done. So initially I made these boxes too small. It was not, not to my design. So I needed to change that geometry. So I went in and I reselected the geometry. Okay, I had to physically change the geometry here, which I did because it was in another layer. So here my geometry was in a different layer. And what I did at that point was, let's click off it here. So I had my geometry here. So I want to modify this geometry. So what I did was, if you can recall, I used lines parallel to extend this geometry. Okay, and then what I did after that was I went up to where that extrude cut resided in my CAD tree, and I right click on geometry and then click reselect. Or I can remove it first to ensure if I'm getting something completely different, and then associate itself with that geometry and rebuild that model. So that's how I got the cut to go deeper into this flange of this hinge. Hope that answers that question. Okay, let me try and bring in another part. Let's see if I can bring in another part. So we did have a question about drilling, so I actually have an example. Let me see which one I got here. I think I have an example for drilling. Hang with me. Okay, so here's a part. We all drill holes. That's very common in machining. So kind of jumping from the CAD to a question that was asked, but this is also a very very important topic because it's something that comes up a lot, and it's a common machining basic function. Basic things that we're doing here is drilling holes. So in this case, I've selected these holes. Okay, and my top of part happens to be here. Okay, let's say I'm touching off some datum here of a stack up or something like that. Top of part is here in line with the top of this boss here. Okay, my holes don't start till the bottom of the this shoulder here, this level of this geometry. Okay, so as you can see, I don't know if it's difficult to see, but as I'm running through, I'll do a back plot. Okay, and for those that are unfamiliar, the back plot gives you an kind of a toolpath simulation. Back plots within the CAD window. You don't have to launch the simulation. So if you just want to isolate, one quick operation, you can do so. So as it's working now, I'll rotate this view, kind of see if I can jump through it a little bit. So this part here walks through my model, right? And it'll gouge right through the part. And why is because I selected all the holes together. That would be no problem if there wasn't, if we didn't have a boss there in the way. So how we get around that is by hole grouping. I'm going to run through this as the drilling operation from the start, just to kind of show, because this is something that we get asked a lot, and I saw a couple questions here. Okay, grouping these holes, very important. So I have this, just to give you an idea of, we pick all these holes. This rapid plane that I have set as 0.2 above my, top of job here, which happens to be 3/4 of an inch below where my setup is. The only time you're going to visit the clearance plane is between either hole groups or between operations, right? Even if it's the same tool, this tool is going to want to stay down, drill this hole, come up to the rapid plane, move over to the next hole, drill that hole, and so on. And because it's down in a pocket, I'm sure we all have holes drilled that are in a pocket. you know, you could set the top of hole to be at the top of the part, but then you're pecking or drilling from the top here and you're feeding. That's wasting time. That's if you got 30, 40, 50 holes to cut, well, that's a lot of time that's being wasted. So the idea is to group these the holes into groups and then have them cut those holes, shoot up to the clearance plane, come over, you know, come down to the next group of holes, drill those, and continue. So let's see how to do that. So I'll just start this one again. Let me delete this feature. Okay, and let's see if I have it. Okay, so the idea here is mill, drill, hole, pick my geometry. Now I can go ahead, I can go in and pick each of these holes individually, or what I can do is actually pick the entire part, and it's going to pick up all these entities and kind of clean up what's not an arc, right, and just pick those whole locations. So I can right click OK or hit spacebar. For those of you that are not familiar, spacebar is the same as right click and OK. So if you're picking geometry in the screen, you can highlight something and hit spacebar. So the whole diameter, it picks automatically, and it sees if I want to select the through hole, I will keep this as a through hole. I can pick the bottom here, which it's picked off the geometry, but let's skip through and see what it's doing and how it's grouping or how it's selecting these holes, and then we'll kind of go from there. So as I work through, I can select this first group. Here's my group. We have a little window here, a graphical window, which really does help if you have a lot of holes on the screen to organize what's going on. Otherwise, you could say, well, which hole's which? Well, it gives you a visual representation of the model, and it gives you the ability to see, again, which holes are which. So these all together, like I had on the previous part, that's just not going to work, all right? Because we saw that rapid plane is 0.2, feed plane is 0.1. This 0.2, not high enough. It's breaking my tool. Okay, so how we get around that is in this group, we'll break the whole group. Okay, when I do that, if I click on a hole, all right, all these holes in this group, as I can click in here under number, then go up and down. I'm using my key on my keyboard. So I'm seeing which holes are which, okay? So as you can probably tell, we'll group these holes by their location, right? So it's kind of 4 little groups is what I'm seeing here. So we'll just start at the top here. So let's see where this hole is. This one's here, okay? That one's there. 3, no, 3 is over there. That's no good. 4, 5, no, 6. Okay, so we got 6, 1, 2, and 3. So if I hold the control key, I'll hold 6, 3, 1. Oh, maybe it wasn't 3, my mistake. Which one was it there? 1, 2, 4, and 6. Okay, so hold the control, 1, 4. There we go, and we'll regroup these. This button over here, regroup. And then I have that as group 1, 1. And then the rest of the holes are here. Okay, so I'll do the same thing for the rest of these. These seem to be in order. Okay, so the rest of these from here to here, I'll regroup these. Okay, and then the rest of the holes, let's see what these are. 11, 12, 13, 14, no. 16, 18. So let's regroup these. Okay, I'll regroup these, and then the remainder. There they are. Oh, not that group. Okay, so regroup these holes, and as you can see now, group 1, there's a group, there's a group, there's a group. And you can rename these groups if you wish. You can also set different top feature and depth to each of these groups individually. So you can apply these attributes differently to different groups within the same part. So that makes it faster. What I have here is I inadvertently clicked the center drill, but let's select that as a drilling operation and take the center drill out just for so it's clearer. I'll work through sorting order. We'll leave that for now. I kind of want to show you the movement here. You see it picks the drill, the diameter of the hole. This will come from our tool crib first, and then our library if you have it. If you don't have it in the tool crib, they'll try and grab one of our system tools. So it's always important to set that up. I'm sure maybe in a future webinar we're going to go through all the setting up your tools and things like that. Not sure if I'm sure everybody would like to see something like that. We'll get a little bit of feedback here as we get going towards the end of the webinar. I want to kind of get an idea of what other topics you guys want to see. Let me just jump through this here. I'll do a pec drill and compute that. Okay, so we definitely see a difference of how it's going through and cut into different groups, right? So it'll cut and start this group, then here, then the third group, then the fourth group. So if everybody can see that, it's avoiding that, yet it's also staying down and efficiently cutting within each group. So that was a question there. The other one was. Other one here was as far as this stock, we looked at the other part where we chose the stock, or we can suppress features to kind of hide them. I'm going to suppress this part here. Right now my stock, what I've done in this model, let me see if I have this part before I drew it. Say this part here. Okay, so the stock happens to be the same as the part. So let's see if I can blank that out. So you see our stock for simulation. You won't actually see that I'm cutting these holes because during my stock, I've selected, if I'll right click, go in my stock wizard, I've selected solid model. And what solid model is I can go in and I can pick what's on the screen or in a layer. So I pick the solid model as is. Well, that's fine, but as I go in the simulation, the holes are already cut in essence because I'm taking it from a finished product. Because I've drawn this in BobCAD, I can come in here and this extrude cut, I can suppress this. Okay, so I'll suppress those holes. Then, as you probably guessed, I'll come back, run my stock wizard again, and repick my model. It's now updating that stock, okay, without those holes. So if I look at it this way, you see? So now when I run the simulation, it's actually going to show me in the stock where it's being cut. So just another way you can use that CAD tree to your advantage. I can just unsuppress this now if I want to pick it as geometry. But just another way that you can use that CAD tree to your advantage. This allows you to get a better simulation. Anybody got any questions? Also want to see some topics. I know Al usually runs these webinars, so he'd love to hear about what you guys want to see in the future. We tried to do this one a little bit differently, where we got some parts for you guys, something to run through for those of you that maybe didn't have too many questions, but also be able to answer the questions. I'd like to thank Mike for answering the questions. I'm sure some of you guys have, if you've taken any of our online training or gone to any of our seminars or listened to our training videos, you've had the pleasure of dealing with Mike, I'm sure. So he handles all that, and he's been answering your questions here while I'm droning on here about part files.
Can you show real quick how to cut a gear, Brian?
Okay, there's a question about cutting a gear. We got a few minutes here, so I'll show you. I think Brian was asking about something like that. So I'll just use the just kind of like the default gear here, just because we're for time sake. Cutting this out is not unlike cutting any other profile. The way you can do it is just set it up with a profile toolpath. I think it was creating gears that you wanted. The gear wizard allows you to put in values for that. If you want to create something separately, what you can do is, for instance, if I had this kind of profile, what you can do is you can actually use the rotate command to copy and rotate how many instances you want around a specific diameter to create this gear. And I'm just gonna, I don't have these exact values, but just to give you an idea, I can say rotate, utilities rotate, and I'll say that I want, let's say, I don't know, 25 copies, and then around Z, so I'll do 360 divided by, let's say 26, because I want 25 copies. Maybe that's probably too many, so. Something like that, it's not, the geometry isn't right because I don't have the dimensions here, but to give you an idea of, that's another way to create a gear, create one tooth or one profile and bring it through using the rotate command. If you want to even do something that's a little bit more advanced, like 3D, you can have two of these, put them on two different Z planes, and then use something like our, if that's what you're after, a 3D, even like a twisted gear, then you can have something like using our cross section and have a couple of those to create a 3D solid. Otherwise, you could just extrude any 2D shape, into a shape that, if you wish. Again, if it's a flat piece, you only need but the 2D geometry to start from. All right, guys, I think we'll probably wrap this up for today. If there's any additional questions, send them in. We'll see if we can get back to you with an email or direct you to a piece of information if we didn't get a chance to answer it here during the webinar. I know everybody's busy, and I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to spend with us here at BobCAD. Again, any questions, send them in. Again, I want to thank Mike for answering the questions, and thank you guys for attending. My name is Walter, and if you need anything, just shoot us an email, and we look forward to spending time with you guys in the next webinar. All right, take care. Thank you.